keeping you up to speed on all your Colorado teams. It's time for Coffee Break.
Welcome into Coffee Break, everybody. Happy Wednesday to you. Hump Day is here, and today's going to be kind of a fun show because I'm flying solo with you today, and I haven't done that yet so far on this show, but if there's one thing I know about myself, it's that I can talk. So I have so much that I want to get into, and I'm excited for it. I've got my man behind the glass, Trey, here, who's going to be throwing up your comments, sports takes, concerns, feedback, anything you want. He's going to throw it up on the screen. I love interacting with you, hearing from you. That's why we do the show in the first place. First thing I want to get into today is probably the headline story of the NFL and maybe the sports world this morning, and that is that the Atlanta Falcons have made the decision after 16 weeks, 15, I guess, if you count the bye week, to bench Kirk Cousins. Supposedly, their starting quarterback savior, who was going to take a team with a loaded roster that seemed like it was primed and ready to win a championship or contend for one, and be that missing piece that fits it all together. And yet, signing him to a 4-year, $180 million contract, less than one season later, he has now been benched, and his replacement was drafted in one of the more surprise picks in the NFL draft. And this is a weird position, I think, for the Falcons to be in, and I'll tell you why. Because just think about this when you lay it out with the parameters that are involved. The Atlanta Falcons just shelled out a massive contract for a free agent quarterback, then immediately turned around and drafted Michael Penix Jr., which I mentioned to our guy James Palmer yesterday, who called the news, who broke the story on draft night before anyone else that this was going to happen. So I guess everyone was surprised but him. They did that right after drafting their guy. And I understand, the NFL teams nowadays, it's with how much risk is involved with starting a rookie quarterback. You take the bridge approach, but that's a pretty expensive Golden Gate size bridge to build. So I don't think by any means their intention was to do this going into the year. Kirk Cousins, I think, and the Falcons started the year off pretty hot through the first 6-7 weeks of the season, and it has fallen off dramatically since then. But you have to know that Raheem Morris, Terry Fontenot, and Arthur Blank, the head coach, GM, and owner of the Atlanta Falcons, have to be furious with the way things are going in Atlanta right now for them to make this move. Because now that they've made this move, there's no going back. We saw it with Russell Wilson here in Denver. Once you benched Russ at the end of the year around this time, ironically, that was it. There's no going back to him, and you're going to move forward. And they will probably say, and have already said, that they're thrilled with where Michael Penix is at and his development in the offseason and so far as an understudy to Kirk Cousins, and they're ready to turn that page. I'm not buying it. They were not ready or wanting to turn this page, and that's just an indictment of how bad that they see things. And now there's speculation coming out that Kirk Cousins' contract, who, by the way, is just under $300 million in career earnings for Kirk, which, considering he's had one playoff win in 13 years and it's been for several different teams, is pretty remarkable. It just goes to show you that what other place than the NFL and here in America can you have that kind of success and achieve that level of earnings? And I'm a card-carrying member of the Kirk Cousins fan club, so I'm not trying to slander my guy more than is necessary, but the numbers simply don't add up for that kind of production. Some are saying that it's the worst NFL contract in history, and the ones prior to that were, painfully as it is to admit here in Denver, Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson. But if you look at the three contracts side by side, Kirk Cousins' contract is not worse than these other two, unfortunately. Fortunately for the Falcons, unfortunately for Broncos fans and I suppose Browns fans, because if you look at the numbers there, the guaranteed money is not the same as Kirk Cousins with the other two. The average annual salaries are different, and the length of the contract, plus factoring in with Deshaun Watson especially and Russell Wilson, you had to factor in draft picks into those. So the teams that gave up on their quarterback, the Seahawks, the Texans, they got a lot more in return than what the Falcons had to shell out, which was just money. They didn't have to give up anything. He was a free agent signing. So this is a tricky situation for them, because now that you're going to have Michael Penix start the last 3 games of the year, I think it's an incomplete sample size no matter what. And I think you have a really high chance of having a false positive here. Again, like we experienced here in Denver with Drew Lock. Imagine if the year that Joe Flacco was benched and Drew Lock, that the Broncos, rather than being like a 3-6 team and just listless offensively and kind of a rudderless ship, were a half a game out of winning their division with genuine playoff capabilities and a loaded roster, especially offensively, although they made a lot of additions on the defensive side as well, around them. Can you imagine what we as Broncos fans would be saying? We'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, it hasn't been what we thought, but we're sitting at 7-7, a half game out of first place in the NFC South, and we can win something here. I know it's not great, but to throw that all away, because yes, could Michael Penix come in and light things up and kind of re-energize and spark some energy out of this team the way that Drew Lock did in his 4-1 start to start his career? Yes, maybe, but look at how that turned out on the back end. So if I'm the Falcons, I don't think I'm going to feel good one way or the other about what we see from Michael Penix and how this season finishes out. Now, if they go on a run and they make the NFC title game, maybe sure, but this is just such a precarious situation for the Falcons to be in, and one that I'm so thankful that here in Broncos country, we are not anymore. We have Bo Nix, and by and large, he seems to be putting a lot of measurements on paper and evidence on tape to be a potential franchise quarterback for the Broncos. But there is one problem with this Broncos offense that they can't seem to fix, and I do think alarm bells should be going off in that regard, and that's the run game. The Broncos' rushing offense has been abysmal this season, and it doesn't really matter who Bo Nix turns the ball and hands off to. There's just not enough juice in that room to squeeze out anything of meaning. And so to have a rookie quarterback who, again, and we'll say it as many times as is relevant until it's no longer, was the 6th quarterback taken off the board. And does draft positioning and status always correlate to how they transition into the pros? No, but it's still a massive undertaking for a young quarterback like Bo Nix to be thrust into a situation where he's on a underachieving, below average, kind of no-name roster up to that point, be the 6th quarterback taken off the board despite being taken 12th overall, and not have really a running game to support him as he kind of adjusts to this next level of play. Now, he's gotten the defensive help, because that's a quarterback's two best friends, right? Good defense and a run game. He's got the defense, and they've even contributed, as James Palmer, our guy, pointed out yesterday, on the scoreboard, more than almost any other defense, if not any other defense in the NFL, scoring basically 40 points. I think it was 39 that he said, 39 points so far this season on the scoreboard. So that will check that box. But the run game, it's not there. And it doesn't matter if it's Javonte Williams, who outside of being better than, and markedly better than the rest of the room in pass protection, he just doesn't have the juice. Javonte, coming out of college when he was at UNC, looked like a guy who was going to be able to be a big, bruising running back between the tackles. He has an unfortunate injury, and sometimes that's just the way the dice fall. You don't come back the same way that you always did prior to that. And does he have a role on this team? Yes. Is it a role that's helping Bo Nix to the degree that he needs the help? No. And Jaleel McLaughlin, who I think by and large has been the most explosive, even if not the most productive, definitely the most explosive back in that field, he has his own limitations. He's significantly smaller than Javonte Williams and even Audric Estime, who's kind of been the third wheel. Tyler Bidet had one of the more explosive performances on the season, but unfortunately he's on injured reserve, and there's nothing that we're going to get from him in the immediate future. Now, Jaleel McLaughlin being a little banged up after this past game against the Colts. He was a DNP on Monday. He was a limited practice participant yesterday. We'll see how he goes today, but at least he's trending in the right direction there. Maybe Blake Watson gets some run if Jaleel can't go, because Audric Estime seems to have a pretty established role here with the Broncos as well, and that he's kind of a minimal carries but late game kind of closer guy. We've seen Sean Payton go to Audric Estime over his two starters in late game situations, close game situations, and closeout game situations. We saw it against the Chiefs when they had a drive that they had to go down and score points to win the game, albeit with a missed field goal. Audric Estime was the one getting those carries, not Javonte, not Jaleel, who got the bulk of the mid-game and early game carries. It's not working no matter who you throw out there, and we keep hearing you got to get more creative in the run game. I've heard Terrell Davis, who makes regular appearances on our station, who must just be banging his head against a wall when it comes to how do you solve the question as a guy who competed at the highest level, performed at a Hall of Fame level, Super Bowl champion level, and to see and hear the disgust and the frustration in his voice of why this team can't just seem to figure it out. Because he's right when he says you don't just see a team that is below average at best at running the football for 14, 15 weeks in the NFL season, all of a sudden flip a switch and figure it out. It just by and large doesn't happen. So the concept of you got to get more creative and you got to do, there's only so much you can do. It's not really on the offensive line. Do they have moments where things don't come across as well? Sure. But the Broncos offensive line is one of the best pass blocking offensive line units in the NFL through PFF and all the other analytics metrics you want to pull up. And their run grading is not bad either, honestly. So it's not all on the offensive line. Is Sean Payton scheming up the right ones? Is he using the personnel to maximize the best of their abilities? In my honest opinion, I think he kind of is. I don't know how much more creative and razzle-dazzle-y you can get when at the end of the day, sometimes as an NFL offense, the quarterback's got to turn around, hand the ball off to somebody who's got to go make a play. You can count the amount of broken tackles and yards above expected plays from this running back room on one hand. You might not even need the other. You definitely don't need to take your shoes off, okay? And that's the problem. So are they using Marvin Mims as kind of like a joker, kind of like X factor in the run game? Sure. But how many times can you mix in a jet sweep or some kind of extended handoff or a short pass as an extension of the run game to use Marvin Mims, who is having a better year, after the start of his career, and he's getting more involved in ways that we haven't seen him, and he's much better in the return game? That's just not the answer either. And in my mind, the Broncos may be in a situation where they don't have a perfect answer. Sean Payton said it at halftime of the Colts game when he's being interviewed on the television broadcast, saying, hey, we know we got to run the ball more. I know we got to run the ball more, and we're going to do it. What does he do coming out of halftime? 4 straight passes resulting in a turnover. Okay, so I think Sean Payton knows they have to run the ball more or have to run the ball better. But I also think Sean Payton knows they can't. The pieces that they have just aren't there. And that is why my unconventional approach to maybe getting more creative is Bo Nix. I think you got to let the duck fly. But we've already seen Bo Nix be the leading rusher on this team several times, especially in the early portion of the season. And while you don't want your quarterback to have to be your rookie quarterback, I want to emphasize, to have to strong arm a passing offense with limited playmakers at the wide receiver position and be the driving force behind your run game. But at this point, the Broncos don't have much else to try. And if this is a team that's going to compete in the postseason, which they have an above 90% chance of doing, if they win this week, this week, as in tomorrow, they will have 100% chance of being in the postseason. And if they want to excel from there, where they're no longer going to get the luxury of playing bad teams. Every team that makes the postseason is good in some respect. There are obviously some that are better than others, especially in the AFC. But they're going to be there. And if they want to be serious about it, which I know that they do, and I know we all want them to be, you've got to try something. And I think Bo Nix is the only card you have left. He's athletic. He's fast. He's strong. And I think he's shown some savviness that is underrated when it comes to the run game. He knows how to position his body. He's made smart plays in terms of knowing when to slide, knowing pursuit angles to take. And there's been other moments that have been judged by him internally in the moment where he's known when to lower his shoulder, use his frame, and get that extra yard or two, especially in the red zone near the goal line for those carries. So I really think that the Broncos, if they have any hope of trying to resurrect some life out of this run game, it's got to come, unfortunately, on the shoulders of Bo Nix. And that's not a great position to be in. It may not even work. And if that's where we sit at the end of the season, where we say, hey, you know what? They tried literally everything they could and it didn't work, then you're going to see a draft pick early in the draft, maybe even at the running back position. I'm seeing some of the comments on the screen there below. The Chiefs just released a guy. His name's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was the 32nd overall pick in the 2020 draft, right after LSU won the national championship in 2019 with Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and that loaded roster. Lloyd Cushenberry, the center on that team. I want nothing to do with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He, to me, looks like a higher drafted Javonte Williams at this point. He's ineffective. He's sluggish. He at times was able to make plays in the receiving game out of the backfield. But don't forget, the Chiefs, who had Clyde Edwards-Helaire, as their main primary guy were scrapping to try to add at that position too. They were bringing in a off the street level Le'Veon Bell to try to juice some carries. They went and drafted Isaiah Pacheco. They brought Kareem Hunt in off the street, as the years have gone on to try to replace that. The Chiefs, who have been as experimental and as creative in using their offensive players as almost any team in the league, couldn't find a way to make a role for this guy with the flexibility that they have. The Broncos aren't going to be there either. So while I appreciate the concept of like, hey, turn over every stone, there's a guy on the street, maybe we take a look at him. Me personally, I don't think that's the guy. I think you got a better shot at getting some juice out of Blake Watson already in the building than you do through Clyde Edwards-Helaire. When it comes to draft picks, though, one draft pick who I think has completely flipped his script based on the early onset of his career to now is Nick frickin' Bonitto. Nick Bonitto has been brilliant this year to the degree where I said it to James Palmer yesterday. I've said it to Marilad and Will Peterson and Jake Shapiro. Basically, anybody that sits in this chair right here to my left, Nick Bonitto is having a defensive player of the year caliber season, even though he probably won't win the award, at least in my eyes. Statistically speaking, he's been an anchor for this Broncos defense. And we talked about for the last handful of years that Patrick Surtain, who probably still is the best individual player on the defense, but the corner position is tough. Nick Bonitto, look at the stats between Nick Bonitto and Micah Parsons, who I think we can all universally agree is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL today. It's not really that much different, and Bonitto has the edge in several major statistical categories. Now, I'm not naive to the fact that Micah Parsons has missed some games here and there, including this season. But listen, if you were going to tell me after the kind of lackluster start to Nick Bonitto's rookie season and kind of the way that he fit within that pass rushing front, within a couple of years was going to blossom into a guy that has back-to-back massive touchdowns, game-breaking, game-changing, momentum-swinging, scoring plays, in addition to just relentless pressure on the quarterback all season long, putting his name up alongside the likes of J.J. Watt and Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons in terms of statistical production through the first 3 months or so of a season, I would have been thrilled. I would have laughed first. I would have laughed. But then when it came to fruition, I would have been and am thrilled. So Nick Bonitto, as unheralded as he may be now, I think is having his coming out party, and he can make an even bigger statement on top of this party with the game tomorrow night. Because if there's one thing that a guy can do to change his name from being kind of whispered or mumbled on the national global scale to being shouted the way we saw with Pat Surtain, it's primetime games. And I think that Sean Payton, through what it appears has been kind of just his MO and his, I don't want to say arrogance, that sounds mean, but his bravado and confidence is what led to flexing the Broncos into a second road Thursday night game in a single regular season, which the NFL actually can't make a team do. You have to allow them, and the Broncos did. I found that to be funny, by the way, that somehow the Broncos and Sean Payton found the one thing that the NFL, who by all intents and purposes is the evil empire and has all the control in the world, you found the one thing they couldn't make you do, and you gave it to them anyways. I just found that to be comical. And while I don't think it was a smart move, we're going to see how the gamble pans out tomorrow night. I do respect the move in a sense of that is Sean Payton being who Sean Payton is. And I think authenticity to who you are when you are building an identity as a team is important. And the head coaching level trickles down to the rest of the locker room. It's the same reason why people will lament Dan Campbell with the Detroit Lions for certain calls that he makes or certain fourth down decisions or onside kicking it with 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter and things of that nature. You may lament it in hindsight when it doesn't work, but that's who Dan Campbell is. And that ethos, that nature that he's brought to that team and meshed with the identity of that city is the driving factor behind the maximization of talent that they're getting. It's why they went from going 1-7 to start a season to rattling off 6 or 7 straight wins and now being the best team in the NFC right there above Philadelphia this season. So if that's who Sean Payton is, and he's hey, anytime I'm going to get an opportunity to play in primetime instead of the 1 p.m. Central window, the 2:00 Mountain window here, I'm going to do it. Okay, I'm with you. Even though in this case, in my opinion, it's a statistical disadvantage, we'll see. But one thing I know is this decision by Sean Payton could benefit Nick Bonitto individually in a massive way if he is able to maximize on that opportunity. When it comes to maximizing opportunities, that is something that I think, unfortunately, our poor Denver Nuggets are not doing at the moment, because they have 4 core players locked into massive money contracts. And with the way the NBA is structured, once you've paid 4 guys like that, there's really not much else that you can do. You've kind of stuffed the cupboard with some pretty big boxes there. So you can maybe cram a few other things here in the nooks and the crannies, but by and large, you've baked your cake. Now it's just, can you get the slicing out of it? And so far, they have not. Nikola Jokic has been Nikola Jokic. He has normalized greatness in a way that I think so few athletes in the world have managed to do, although Pat Surtain seems to kind of be doing that in the NFL, at least especially here locally, if you ask us. But it's the rest of the crew. It's the kids that Jokic is dragging along in Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Christian Brown, and such. The Nuggets are not getting the maximized potential and opportunity out of those players. Jamal Murray has been on a very well documented, very publicized slump to start the year, and it's not always uncharacteristic of Jamal to have those stretches, nor any player really in any sense. I mean, shoot, a great article at denversports.com by Jake Shapiro, if you want to check it out. The Nuggets, the year that they hoisted their first Larry O'Brien trophy in franchise history, my watch is yelling at me, they started the season almost identically to how they have this season. And Jamal Murray, who was struggling with injury and effectiveness at the start of that season, is doing that again this season. So nothing is written in stone. There's no prophecy to be foretold here. History can repeat itself, but the parameters around each of those teams and the settings with which those are taking place are different. In this case, I don't think we had as much concern about the rest of the supporting cast with the Nuggets in the championship year as we do now. In all honesty, that championship year, it was just about health. It was just about staying healthy. We felt confident that Aaron Gordon was going to be Aaron Gordon when he was healthy in that championship year. Michael Porter Jr., we may have had a little bit more concern about, and I think he's done some steps to diversify his game more so this year. I think he's more of a threat in the mid-range. I think he's a little bit more of a rebounding presence, even if it doesn't show up necessarily on the stat sheet. I think he's doing a better job of crashing the boards and being a physical presence in there. But if you look at the trade options that are being put out by The Athletic, who is reporting that the Nuggets have poked around and had interest in the likes of a Zach LaVine, the small forward from the Bulls, Brandon Ingram, the small forward from the Pelicans, Cam Johnson with the Brooklyn Nets, Jordan Clarkson, guys of that nature. Michael Porter Jr. is the piece you're going to move to, especially for like the likes of like a Zach LaVine, to make that happen. And I personally don't think that's the answer. Look at the statistical difference between the two. It's pretty marginal, if not favoring in Michael Porter Jr.'s favor in a lot of those categories. And add in the fact that Michael Porter Jr. is 5 inches taller and 3 years younger. So is Zach LaVine going to suddenly supplant Michael Porter Jr. and just come in and fix or right all the wrongs that we're seeing? I disagree. I think they're two completely different stylistic players. I think with Zach LaVine, he's a much more, he's good in the ISO game, but with being good in the ISO game comes being a ball dominant, ball hog type player. And I don't know that that necessarily fits in with the flow of the game as it runs through Nikola Jokic. I don't know that that's the answer. Now, at the end of the day, your counter argument to me could be, hey, we just need guys to make shots. And maybe if you have a ball dominant player who's able to turn that into efficient possessions, maybe. But again, I just don't think that that's the answer. Now, if you wanted to explore other options, like maybe bringing in a Jordan Clarkson, I don't think you would need to move MPJ for that, because it's all about matching contracts in the NBA, which gets exhausting when you're factoring in the aprons now and all of these other things. But you could probably move a guy like Zeke Naji and throw in some draft compensation or something like that to bring in a Jordan Clarkson, but that's bolstering your bench. That's not making an impact move to help your starters who need help. And to be frank, similarly to the Broncos in their run game, there may just not be a lot left the Nuggets can do. Calvin Booth and company may have baked this cake, and you just have to hope that eventually you start liking the way it tastes. And that's a scary place to be in. But what the other alternatives were what? Moving on from some of those guys. I think when you locked a lot of these guys down, with the exception of MPJ, whose contract extension predates the Calvin Booth era, what else were you going to do? You kind of had to bet on that. And I understand that with the NBA, there's the logic of you got to get in front of things before the price and the things balloon up even more, because the money is crazy. When MPJ signed that deal, we were like, as a max level contract player, we were all shaking our heads, or at least I was, and a lot of people here in the building were like, whoa. I mean, this was a guy that not that long ago was being plagued by drop foot and other kinds of injuries that we weren't sure he was going to be able to come back from. And, by grace and he has. It just hasn't translated into the level of consistency that you would expect from a player, nor that player, or has he been able to truly maximize what I think his ceiling is. As a build, Michael Porter Jr. has Kevin Durant level mismatch from his physical frame combined with his shooting skill set. And so I think, unfortunately, even though I applauded the Avs for making a move to try to shake something up, the Avs shook it up. They dumped Eustace Sanon and Georgie and brought in the Woods, Mackenzie Blackwood, Scott Wedgwood. They did the best that they could within their framework, but ultimately, the Avs need their core players, their star players, Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Val Nichushkin, Cale Makar, and even Arturi Lehkonen on that top line to a certain degree, to just be the top line guys. They need their stars to be the stars, because they can't do much else other than what they've done to resolve the goaltending situation. The Nuggets, same situation. You can bring in a bench guy like a Jordan Clarkson, or maybe make some moves for some secondary type players. But at the end of the day, if the Nuggets are going to maximize this year's title potential, they just need the non-Jokic starters to live up to their billing and their contracts. A scary situation to be in, because there's nothing worse than knowing you need something to change and not really being able to do much about it. You're just kind of sitting and hoping. But that's kind of where I feel like we're at. The Avs shook it up. The Nuggets need to shake it off. They need to get out of this rut that they're in, and hopefully they will. All I know is we're going to be here to watch it. So I appreciate you all hanging out with me. It's been a nice 28 minutes. I wasn't sure how long we were going to go there, but it's been a nice 28 minutes. I'm sure if I just kept staring at this camera screen, I might have been able to rattle on for 28 more. You never know. But as always, I appreciate all of your interaction. I love going back after the show and commenting on social media and replying to all of your things. And on social media, if you haven't already, give us a follow. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, at Denver Sportscom. So much content beyond just Coffee Break. Orange and Blue today. All of the content from our daily shows with Stokely and Evans with Mark Schlereth, Dover and Cecil, The Drive with Zach By and Philip Lindsay. The written content is more than I can possibly consume, and I read a lot. So please, please, please give us a shout out. Give us a check on all those social media platforms, and I will see you tomorrow for a Broncos game day.